He thought the uniform was a costume, until the street learned who was wearing it. The afternoon sun burned bright over Constitution Avenue, turning the windows of federal buildings into sheets of gold and casting long shadows across the sidewalks of Washington, D.C. Tourists moved in clusters, cameras hanging from their necks, children tugging on souvenir bags, office workers weaving through the crowd with coffee cups in hand. It felt like any other weekday in the Capitol, busy, loud, forgettable. Then everything stopped. A patrol car rolled hard to the curb, lights flashing blue across the marble walls of a nearby memorial. Officer Daniel Mercer stepped out fast, jaw tight, one hand resting near his belt, eyes locked on a tall black man walking alone in full navy dress whites. The uniform was immaculate. White coat pressed sharp as paper, gold buttons catching sunlight, rows of ribbons lined with perfect precision, black shoes polished like mirrors. Every step the man took carried discipline, the kind forged over years most people could never imagine. But Mercer did not see discipline. He saw suspicion. "Hey, you there. Stop right now." His voice cracked across the street, loud enough to turn heads from 50 feet away. Conversations died. Footsteps slowed. Phones came out. The man stopped and turned with measured calm. He looked to be in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, posture straight, expression unreadable. His skin was dark bronze beneath the bright afternoon light, his face composed in a way that made panic seem impossible. Commander Elijah Brooks did not raise his hands dramatically. He did not argue. He simply stood still and waited. Mercer marched forward. "Where'd you get that uniform?" he demanded. "Excuse me?" Elijah asked, voice steady and low. "Don't play games with me. Stolen valor is a crime. ID now." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Some people exchanged looks. Others glanced at the ribbons on Elijah's chest, then back at Mercer, unsure what they were watching. Elijah reached slowly into the inside pocket of his coat. Mercer immediately stepped closer. "Easy, real easy." He snatched the identification card before Elijah could fully present it. He barely glanced at it. "Fake cards are cheap these days," Mercer said. A teenager near the crosswalk whispered, "Man, that guy's Navy." His mother pulled him back by the sleeve. Elijah's eyes moved once across the street, taking in the growing circle of onlookers, the cameras recording, the reflected lights flashing off the monuments. "Officer," he said calmly, "you are making a serious mistake." Mercer laughed once through his nose. "Funny. You people always say that when consequences show up." The sentence hung in the air like smoke. Several faces in the crowd hardened. Someone muttered, "Did he really say that?" Elijah did not react. That silence unsettled Mercer more than shouting ever could have. "Hands behind your back," Mercer ordered. "For what reason?" "Obstruction. Failure to identify. Maybe impersonation too." Mercer moved closer and guided Elijah toward the hood of the patrol car. The white sleeve of the uniform brushed against the dusty metal, leaving a gray streak across fabric that had likely been spotless moments earlier. A woman gasped softly. Elijah looked down once at the mark, then back at Mercer. Still no anger. Still no fear. Only patience. Then he turned his wrist and checked the time on a silver watch. "You checking your schedule?" Mercer mocked. Elijah met his eyes. "No," he said. "I'm checking yours." The crowd went quiet. Even the traffic seemed farther away now. Mercer's radio crackled once at his shoulder. Then again. Then a third time, sharper than before. He ignored it. Elijah looked toward the far end of the avenue where black SUVs had just turned the corner. "You have 3 minutes," he said. Mercer stared at Elijah for a moment, unsure whether he had just heard a warning or a joke. The officer smirked anyway, because arrogance often speaks loudest when doubt first enters the room. 3 minutes for what?" he asked. Elijah said nothing. He stood beside the patrol car with the same measured calm that had unsettled the crowd from the start. His white uniform now carried a streak of dust across one sleeve, but somehow it only made him look more composed, as if disorder could not cling to him for long. Mercer's radio crackled again. "Unit 12, respond." He clicked it off without listening. "You do not get to ignore me and act important," Mercer said, raising his voice for the people filming nearby. "I have seen every kind of scam in this city." A man in a business suit near the curb shook his head. "That is not a costume," he muttered under his breath. A woman beside him whispered, "Look at the ribbons. Look at how he carries himself." Mercer heard neither. Pride has a way of muting reality. He took Elijah's identification card from his pocket again and held it up like evidence. Commander Elijah Brooks. He read with sarcastic emphasis. Sounds impressive. Elijah looked at the card, then back at Mercer. It should, he replied. A few people in the crowd tried not to smile. Mercer's jaw tightened. You think this is funny? No, Elijah said. I think it is unfortunate. The radio came alive once more, louder this time. Officer Mercer, acknowledge immediately. Several heads turned toward the sound. Mercer grabbed the radio and lowered the volume. Busy, he snapped. Then he shoved it back onto his shoulder. He stepped closer to Elijah and lowered his voice. Here is what is going to happen. You are going downtown until I sort this out. Elijah glanced again at his watch. 2 minutes. The words landed differently now. Less like confidence. More like certainty. Traffic slowed in the nearest lane as drivers leaned out windows to see what was happening. More phones rose into the air. A teenager began live streaming, narrating breathlessly to viewers. This officer just stopped a Navy guy, and now black trucks are coming down the avenue. Mercer turned sharply. Back up, all of you. Keep moving. But nobody moved. Curiosity had replaced fear. At the far end of the street, 3 black SUVs advanced in formation, polished and silent, turning through traffic with practiced precision. They did not rush. They did not need to. Their presence alone changed the atmosphere. Mercer laughed once, too loudly. What is this, your ride? Elijah did not answer. The first SUV stopped 20 feet away. The second positioned behind it. The third blocked the lane. Doors opened in perfect sequence. Men and women in dark suits stepped out with earpieces and disciplined eyes, scanning everything in seconds. Then another figure emerged from the lead vehicle. Older, tall, navy posture, silver hair at the temples. His uniform was not ceremonial white, but dark service attire marked with stars at the shoulder. Even people who knew nothing about the military felt the shift instantly. Conversations died. The crowd fell silent. Mercer's expression changed for the first time that day. He straightened unconsciously. The senior officer walked forward, each step deliberate. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at the cameras. He looked only at the dust mark on Elijah's sleeve, then at the patrol car, then finally at Mercer. Who detained Commander Brooks? He asked. Mercer swallowed. I did, sir. We are handling a suspicious impersonation matter. The officer's eyes hardened. No, he said quietly. What you are handling is the Deputy Director of Naval Strategic Operations. Mercer's face lost color. Around them, the city seemed to stop breathing. Elijah took back his identification card, slid it into his coat, and spoke for the first time in nearly a minute. Your 3 minutes are up. The words hit Mercer harder than any siren ever could. Deputy Director of Naval Strategic Operations. The title carried weight even among those who did not fully understand it. They understood enough. This was not a random pedestrian in a uniform. This was not a man pretending to belong. This was someone whose schedule likely shaped rooms Mercer would never be allowed to enter. The senior officer stepped closer, his polished shoes stopping inches from the dust-marked patrol car. I am Admiral Thomas Whitaker, he said, voice calm and sharp at once. And I would like to know why one of my top officers was publicly detained on a city sidewalk. Mercer opened his mouth, then closed it. The crowd noticed. Confidence had vanished so quickly it felt unreal. A few people lowered their phones only to raise them again, knowing the real moment had just begun. Elijah remained still, shoulders squared, hands relaxed at his sides. He did not rescue Mercer. He did not embarrass him. Further, he simply allowed truth to occupy the space lies had taken. There was suspicious behavior, Mercer finally said. I was verifying identity. Admiral Whitaker turned his head slowly. By ignoring a valid military identification card, Mercer said nothing. By speaking to a decorated officer as if service to this country were something to mock. Still nothing. The Admiral's gaze moved to the radio on Mercer's shoulder. And by disregarding repeated calls from your own command, Mercer instinctively touched the radio, but did not answer. Around them, the city noise seemed distant now. Even the buses passing half a block away felt muted. People sensed they were witnessing something larger than one officer's mistake. They were watching arrogance meet consequence in real time. Elijah looked down at the gray streak across his sleeve. He brushed it once with 2 fingers, then let his hand fall. Sir, he said to the Admiral, there is no need for escalation. Mercer glanced at him in surprise. Mercy is often most painful when it comes from the person you wronged. Whitaker nodded once to Elijah, then faced Mercer again. Commander Brooks was on his way to a closed security briefing less than 1 mile from here. Your actions delayed federal operations, created a public scene, and displayed conduct unbecoming of anyone entrusted with authority. The phrase landed with surgical precision. Mercer's breathing changed. He stood straighter, but now it was not pride. It was instinct, the body trying to hide panic. A police cruiser arrived at the curb behind the first patrol car. Out stepped Captain Laura Bennett of the Metropolitan Police Department, moving quickly with 2 supervisors behind her. She had heard enough before she even reached them. "Officer Mercer," she said, voice clipped and cold. "Why have you failed to answer dispatch for the last 4 minutes?" Mercer turned toward her with visible relief, as if local rank might still save him. "Captain, I was conducting an investigative stop." Bennett looked at Elijah, then at Admiral Whitaker, then at the cameras surrounding them. "No," she said quietly. "You were conducting a career-ending lesson in poor judgment." A murmur spread through the crowd. Mercer's shoulders dropped a fraction. Bennett held out her hand. "Badge. Radio. Keys." He froze. The request was simple. The meaning was devastating. "Now," she added. With trembling fingers, Mercer removed the badge that had made him feel untouchable only minutes earlier. He placed it in her palm. The radio followed. Then the cruiser keys. No shouting. No struggle. No spectacle beyond the silence of a man confronting what he had become. Elijah watched without satisfaction. That unsettled the crowd even more. They expected revenge. What they saw was dignity. Captain Bennett turned to him. "Commander Brooks, on behalf of this department, I apologize." Elijah met her eyes. "Do better than apologize," he said. "Train better. See better." No one moved. No one spoke. The words were too clean to argue with. Captain Bennett closed her hand around Mercer's badge as if it weighed far more than metal. The crowd that had come for spectacle now stood in unusual silence, because humiliation loses its entertainment value when truth becomes visible. Mercer looked smaller without the symbols he had relied on. Not physically smaller, but reduced in some deeper way. The belt, the radio, the patrol car, the practiced command voice that once pushed strangers backward by instinct alone. Without them, he was simply a man standing in the center of consequences. Admiral Whitaker checked the time and turned to Elijah. "We are already 7 minutes behind schedule." Elijah nodded once. "Then let us not lose 8. Even now, duty came before emotion." That fact did not go unnoticed. Captain Bennett stepped aside respectfully as the Admiral and Commander Brooks moved toward the lead SUV. Before Elijah entered, he paused and looked back at Mercer. There was no anger in his expression. No triumph. No bitterness. Somehow that made the moment harder to watch. "Officer Mercer," Elijah said evenly, "authority is not proven by who you can stop. It is proven by who you choose not to disrespect." Mercer lowered his eyes. He had no answer. Elijah entered the vehicle, and the door closed with a quiet finality that felt louder than a slammed gate. The convoy pulled away from the curb in smooth formation, disappearing into Washington traffic as if it had never been there at all. But everyone knew the street would remember. Captain Bennett turned to the supervisors beside her. "Secure all body camera footage. Witness statements. Dispatch logs. Every second." They moved immediately. Mercer looked up in alarm. "Captain, this can be explained." Bennett faced him with the exhausted expression of someone who had seen this story before. "I agree," she said. "It can be explained. Repeatedly. In reports. In hearings. In front of people tired of hearing it." She handed his badge to a lieutenant and pointed toward the second cruiser. "You are relieved of duty pending investigation." The sentence was formal, but its impact was personal. A young officer standing nearby watched quietly, absorbing every word. Mercer noticed and turned away. The cameras were still up. The tourists were still filming. A city worker in an orange vest shook his head slowly. A mother squeezed her son's shoulder and whispered, "Remember this part." The boy asked, "Which part?" She answered, "The part where respect mattered more than power." Mercer was escorted to the rear seat of the cruiser, not as punishment, but procedure. Yet procedure feels very different when it is finally aimed at you. As the door closed, he caught his reflection in the window. No lights behind him. No authority in his hands. Just a tired face and the memory of a mistake replaying in real time. Captain Bennett remained on the sidewalk after the cruiser left. She looked at the crowd and spoke loud enough for phones to capture every word. If a uniform makes you assume guilt when worn by one man and honor when worn by another, the problem is not the uniform. The statement traveled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Some nodded. Some looked ashamed. Some simply saved the video. 2 blocks away, inside the moving SUV, Elijah adjusted the sleeve of his dress whites where the dust had been. It had almost fully brushed away. Admiral Whitaker glanced at him. You handled that with restraint. Elijah looked out the tinted window at monuments sliding past. Restraint is easy, he said quietly. The hard part is knowing how many others had no convoy coming. Whitaker did not respond for several seconds. That is why you are in the room today, he said at last. Elijah nodded once. The city continued around them, busy and unaware that one sidewalk encounter had already become something larger. Not because a powerful man had been recognized, but because for a few unforgettable minutes, power had been forced to recognize dignity. The convoy reached the Pentagon complex under a sky turning pale gold with late afternoon light. Security gates opened in sequence, barriers lowering before the lead vehicle without hesitation. Inside, corridors of polished stone and quiet urgency stretched in every direction, where footsteps mattered and minutes were measured like currency. Elijah Brooks walked beside Admiral Whitaker through the main passageway, his white uniform restored except for the faintest crease near one sleeve, the last trace of a sidewalk the city had not yet forgotten. Staff members moved aside as they passed, some nodding respectfully, others glancing twice after hearing whispers spread ahead of them. News travels fast in Washington. Humiliation travels faster when cameras are involved. Whitaker opened the door to a secure conference room where officials from the Navy, Department of Defense, and federal oversight offices were already seated around a long walnut table. Screens glowed softly on the walls. Folders waited at every seat. Conversation stopped the moment Elijah entered. A woman from the Inspector General's office stood first. Commander Brooks, are you all right? He placed a leather folder on the table and answered plainly. I am fine. The issue is larger than me. That answer changed the room. Sympathy gave way to attention. Whitaker took his seat at the head of the table. Then let us discuss the larger issue. Elijah remained standing for a moment, hands resting lightly on the chair before him. Today was inconvenient, he said. For me, it was 7 lost minutes. For someone else, it could have been a lost job, a child watching, a permanent fear of uniforms, or a story nobody believes because no convoy arrives. No one interrupted. The room understood they were no longer discussing a sidewalk encounter. They were discussing trust itself. Elijah sat down and opened the folder. Inside were reports, surveys, internal studies, and recommendations he had spent months preparing for this exact meeting. Bias in authority spaces creates security risk, he continued. When judgment is clouded by assumptions, real threats are missed and innocent people are targeted. That is not only unjust, it is operational failure. A civilian analyst adjusted his glasses. You are saying prejudice weakens readiness. I am saying it already has, Elijah replied. Screens changed at a touch. Data appeared. Delays at gates. Misidentification incidents. Civilian complaints near military zones. Recruitment concerns among minority communities. Every chart was clean. Every number quiet. Yet together they spoke loudly. Whitaker leaned back, studying the room more than the data. And what do you recommend? Elijah answered without looking at notes. Mandatory bias recognition training tied to promotion reviews. Joint exercises with local law enforcement near federal sites. Real accountability metrics, not symbolic seminars. And leadership that treats dignity as readiness, not public relations. Across the table, several officials exchanged glances. Some defensive, some impressed, some uncomfortable because truth often sounds expensive before it sounds necessary. Whitaker folded his hands. Approved for immediate task review, he said. Draft implementation by Monday. Pens moved quickly. A colonel near the far end nodded once, almost to himself. Elijah exhaled slowly. Not relief. Resolve. His phone vibrated once against the table. A message from Captain Bennett. Body camera secured. Internal affairs notified. Full cooperation requested. Elijah read it, then set the phone face down. Whitaker noticed. The city reached out. Yes, sir. Will you pursue it? Elijah looked at the rows of officials around him. I will pursue correction, he said. Punishment alone teaches fear. Change teaches memory. The room fell silent again. Outside the Pentagon windows, the sun dipped lower over Arlington. Inside, signatures began. Orders moved. Timelines formed. What had started with one officer's assumptions was now becoming policy. Later, as the meeting ended, Whitaker walked beside Elijah toward the corridor. You could have demanded headlines today, the admiral said. Elijah adjusted the cuff of his dress whites. Headlines fade, he replied. Standards remain. Whitaker smiled faintly. That is why I sent the convoy. Elijah looked ahead, expression calm as ever. No, sir, he said. You sent the convoy because too many never get one. By evening, the video had reached every corner of the city. It played on phones in apartment kitchens, on tablets in break rooms, on televisions mounted above bar counters where people paused mid-conversation to watch the same 30 seconds again and again. The moment Officer Mercer laughed. The moment the black SUVs arrived. The moment his badge left his hand. Some viewers focused on the fall. Others focused on the calm man in white who never raised his voice once. In Washington, reactions travel fast, but patterns travel faster when people recognize them. At Metropolitan Police Headquarters, Captain Laura Bennett stood in a conference room with the blinds half closed and a screen glowing at the front wall. Around the table sat commanders, legal advisors, training officers, and the mayor's public safety liaison. No one touched the coffee set in front of them. Bennett clicked the remote. The footage froze on Mercer facing Elijah beside the patrol car. This is not about one officer having one bad afternoon, she said. If that is all we call it, we learn nothing. She advanced the screen. Witness clips. Dispatch logs. Body camera timestamps. Mercer ignoring repeated radio calls. Comments from bystanders. The silence in the room grew heavier with each frame. A deputy chief cleared his throat. The city is already asking for a statement. Bennett did not look at him. The city deserves reform before it gets wording. A few eyes dropped to the table. Across town, Elijah stepped out of the Pentagon into cool evening air. The day had stretched longer than expected, yet he still carried himself with the same unhurried precision. The white uniform now glowed softly beneath the parking lights. A young Marine at the entrance snapped to attention as he passed. Elijah returned the salute with equal respect. Rank did not impress him as much as discipline did. His phone vibrated again. Another message from Captain Bennett. Formal request to meet. Training review board tomorrow. Elijah read it while walking toward a waiting sedan. He replied with only 4 words. I will be there. Inside the police headquarters conference room, tension finally broke. With respect, said one commander. Bringing in the man from the video may look performative. Bennett turned sharply. Then make sure it is not. She placed both palms on the table. He asked for better training, better vision, better standards. We can either resent that sentence or deserve it. Nobody challenged her after that. The next morning, rain tapped softly against city windows as officers filed into the training auditorium. Some came skeptical, some embarrassed, some curious. At the front of the room stood no podium, no banner, no press cameras. Just rows of chairs and a single microphone. When Elijah entered in a dark civilian suit instead of dress whites, several officers barely recognized him. Without the uniform, many saw what they had missed before. Authority had never been in the fabric. It had always been in the man. Bennett introduced him simply. Commander Brooks volunteered his time today. Elijah stepped forward. No, he said calmly. I invested it. A few officers shifted in their seats. He looked across the room, not angry, not warm, just clear. Yesterday was not unusual because it happened, he continued. It was unusual because it was filmed, corrected quickly, and attached to someone with institutional access. Ask yourselves how many stops do not include those 3 things. No one moved. Pens began to write. Bias does not always shout, Elijah said. Sometimes it whispers. It tells you who belongs, who looks suspicious, who deserves patience, who does not. If you listen long enough, it becomes instinct. An instinct wearing a badge can damage a city. The room stayed silent because every sentence landed where excuses usually. Live. In the back row, younger officers leaned forward. Veterans stared ahead. Bennett watched from the side wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Elijah paused once, then added the line they would remember longest. You do not need to hate someone to fail them. Sometimes all it takes is assuming you understand them before you do. Outside, the rain continued over Washington streets. Inside, something rarer had begun. Not punishment, not headlines. The slower work of change. The auditorium remained quiet long after Elijah finished speaking. Officers did not rush for the exits. They sat with notebooks open, staring at thoughts they had not expected to confront that morning. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked changed. A few looked angry, though even that anger seemed directed inward. Captain Bennett stepped to the microphone and thanked everyone for attending. But the room knew the real lesson had not come from policy slides or department language. It had come from a man who had every reason to condemn them and chose instead to challenge them. As chairs finally scraped and people began filing out, one officer stayed seated in the third row. Daniel Mercer. He was out of uniform, wearing a plain navy jacket and gray slacks, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. Most people passing recognized him from the footage. Some pretended not to. Others glanced too long. Public shame has a way of following people into rooms before they arrive. Bennett noticed him and crossed the aisle. "You were not required to attend," she said quietly. Mercer nodded without looking up. "I know. Then why are you here?" He took several seconds before answering. "Because for the first time, I wanted to hear what I sounded like from the outside." Bennett studied him carefully. Excuses have a tone. Regret has another. She could tell the difference. Across the room, Elijah was collecting a folder from the front table when Mercer stood and began walking toward him. Conversations nearby slowed. A few officers stopped at the doors. The room seemed to hold its breath again, though this time no cameras were raised. Mercer stopped 6 feet away. "Commander Brooks." Elijah turned. His expression remained calm, unreadable. "Officer Mercer." The title was deliberate. Mercer no longer held it officially, but Elijah gave it back for the moment. That small grace nearly broke him more than punishment had. "I was wrong," Mercer said. "No speech. No qualifiers. No explanation. I judged you before I saw you. I spoke to you like your dignity depended on my permission. And I have been replaying that sidewalk in my head ever since." Elijah said nothing. Silence can invite truth better than interruption ever can. Mercer swallowed hard. "I do not expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it where it mattered." Around them, officers listened without pretending otherwise. Bennett remained near the wall, arms folded, watching closely. Elijah took a slow breath. "Do you know what bothered me most?" he asked. Mercer looked up. "The disrespect?" "No," Elijah's voice stayed even. "The certainty. You were certain in the first 10 seconds. Certain enough to stop listening. Certain enough to ignore evidence. Certain enough to think authority meant instinct could not be wrong." Mercer lowered his head again. Every word was accurate. "Confidence without humility is dangerous," Elijah continued, "especially when strangers pay the price for it." The room was still enough to hear rain against the windows. Mercer nodded once. "I understand that now." Elijah looked at him for a long moment. "Then do something useful with the lesson." Mercer frowned slightly, confused. "How?" "When investigators ask questions, answer honestly. When training reviews happen, tell the truth. If you ever wear a badge again anywhere, earn it differently. If you never do, teach your son or daughter what you learned too late." Mercer's eyes widened. "How did you know I have a daughter?" Elijah gave the faintest hint of a smile. "You looked at the family photo on your lock screen 3 times while pretending not to be nervous." A few officers nearby exhaled softly, tension breaking for the first time. Mercer's face tightened with emotion. "She is 9. "Then start there," Elijah said. Mercer nodded again, slower this time. No dramatic handshake followed. No instant redemption. Real. Change is quieter than movies make it. Mercer stepped aside and walked toward the exit alone, carrying nothing visible except a harder kind of honesty. Bennett approached Elijah once he was gone. "You did not have to give him that much." Elijah picked up his folder. "I did not give him anything," he said. "I gave him responsibility." Outside, the rain was clearing. Thin sunlight pressed through the clouds over Washington, touching wet pavement and making it shine. 3 weeks later, the city moved with the same noise, traffic, and urgency it always had, but inside certain buildings the atmosphere had changed. Training rooms that once sat half empty were now full. Supervisors who had rushed through accountability reviews now asked harder questions. Dash camera audits increased. Complaint patterns were tracked instead of buried in folders. None of it made headlines for long, which is often how real progress begins. Quietly, without applause. At Metropolitan Police Headquarters, Captain Bennett stood before a wall screen displaying new department standards. Bias recognition modules tied to promotion eligibility, mandatory de-escalation refreshers, community review panels with rotating civilian observers, field mentorship for first-year officers. Some veterans resisted. Others adapted. The younger officers watched carefully, learning which kind of future the room would reward. "We are not lowering standards," Bennett said to a row of sergeants. "We are finally defining them correctly." Across the city, Daniel Mercer sat in a smaller room with 2 investigators and a recorder light glowing red on the table. There were no flashing lights now, no sidewalk audience, no symbols to hide behind. Just questions and the cost of answering them honestly. "Why did you disregard the identification?" one investigator asked. Mercer looked at his folded hands. "Because I had already decided who he was before I read it." The room went still. Truth, when stated plainly, can sound more severe than accusation. "Why did you ignore dispatch?" "Because I thought I was in control." He answered for nearly 2 hours. No excuses. No polished language. When it ended, one investigator closed the folder slowly. "This statement will not help your case," she said. Mercer nodded. It was not meant to. Later that afternoon, Elijah Brooks visited Anacostia Middle School at the request of a principal who had seen the viral footage. The gymnasium buzzed with the restless energy of 7th and 8th graders until he walked onto the stage in a simple navy suit. They knew him immediately. Children always recognize dignity faster than adults do. He did not speak first about the incident. He spoke about discipline, education, and carrying yourself with purpose when rooms underestimate you. Then a boy near the front raised his hand. "Were you mad at that officer?" Laughter rippled through the bleachers. Elijah smiled faintly. "Of course," he said. "But anger is a spark. It can light a candle or burn down your own house. You choose." Pens moved across notebooks. Teachers exchanged looks. Another student asked, "Why did you stay so calm?" Elijah glanced toward the gym doors where afternoon sunlight spilled in stripes across the floor. "Because panic gives your power away before anyone takes it." By evening, clips from the school visit spread online beside the older sidewalk footage. The contrast struck people. Same man, same calm, different room, different purpose. One video showed exposure. The other showed example. At sunset, Elijah stood alone for a moment outside the school as parents loaded children into cars. Captain Bennett approached from the curb, coat folded over one arm. "You are becoming popular," she said. Elijah looked amused. "That sounds temporary." She handed him a sealed envelope. "Then this may interest you more." Inside was a formal notice from the city council recognizing his contribution to public service reform and inviting him to advise on a permanent training initiative. Elijah read it once and closed the envelope. "I did not ask for recognition." Bennett nodded. "I know. That is why it means something." Traffic hummed beyond the parking lot. Children laughed somewhere behind them. The city sounded ordinary again. "What happened to Mercer?" Elijah asked. Bennett looked toward the fading skyline. "Administrative separation likely. Final decision pending." Elijah was quiet for a moment. "I hope he tells the truth at home." Bennett studied him. "You still think about everyone else in the story, do you not?" Elijah placed the envelope in his coat pocket. "That is the only way stories become lessons." The streetlights flickered on one by one as evenings settled over Washington, and for once, they illuminated a city trying to see more clearly. Autumn arrived quietly over Washington. Leaves gathered along curbs. Mornings carried a sharper chill, and the city moved beneath a sky of pale silver. Nearly 2 months had passed since the sidewalk encounter that forced strangers, officers, and officials alike to confront what they preferred to overlook. The headlines had faded, replaced by elections, scandals, and sports scores, but inside institutions, some changes had stayed. Training reforms were active. Promotion reviews now included conduct metrics once ignored. Community forums filled faster than expected. Progress was not dramatic enough for television, yet too real to dismiss. On a Saturday morning, families lined the National Mall for a veterans recognition ceremony. Folding chairs stretched across the lawn. Flags lifted in a steady breeze. School bands tuned instruments nearby, while volunteers handed out bottled water and printed programs. Commander Elijah Brooks stood backstage in full dress, whites once more, the same bright uniform that had been doubted on a city sidewalk. This time no dust marked the sleeve. Every ribbon sat perfectly aligned. Captain Bennett approached, carrying coffee in paper cups. "You clean up well," she said. Elijah accepted one with a faint smile. "You say that like it was uncertain." She laughed softly, then grew serious. "The department voted last night. New academy curriculum is permanent." Elijah nodded. "Good. That is all you have to say?" she asked. "Good." He looked out toward the crowd where children climbed chairs to see the stage. "If it lasts, it will speak for itself." Before Bennett could answer, a small girl of about 9 stepped hesitantly around the barrier rope, holding her father's hand. Elijah recognized the face immediately from a lock screen he had glimpsed weeks earlier. Mercer's daughter. The former officer stood several feet back, dressed simply, no trace of authority except the humility in his posture. He did not step forward. He let his daughter lead. The girl looked up at Elijah. "Mr. Brooks?" "Yes, ma'am," he said gently, lowering himself to one knee so they were eye level. She held out a folded note decorated with uneven stars drawn in blue marker. "My dad said I should give you this myself." Elijah accepted it carefully. "Thank you." She hesitated. "He also said to tell you he is trying to be better." Behind her, Mercer lowered his eyes. The crowd noise seemed to fade for a moment. Elijah opened the note. In a child's handwriting it read, "My dad says respect means seeing people right the first time. I am learning too." He folded it slowly and placed it inside his coat pocket near the city council letter he still had not framed. "That is a very smart lesson," he told her. "Keep learning it faster than adults do." She smiled and ran back to her father. Mercer met Elijah's gaze from a distance. No words passed between them. None were needed. Some apologies are spoken once. Others are lived. Minutes later, Elijah walked to the podium as applause rolled across the lawn. Veterans from every branch sat in the front rows, some in wheelchairs, some standing straight despite age, all carrying history strangers could never fully see. Elijah looked over the crowd before speaking. "Uniforms matter," he began, voice steady through the microphone. "They represent service, sacrifice, and standards. But cloth alone cannot create honor. Titles alone cannot create character. Badges alone cannot create justice." The breeze lifted the flags behind him. Hundreds listened in complete silence. "What matters most is how we treat people before we know what they can do for us, before we know their rank, before we know their story. Because dignity should never require proof." Captain Bennett felt the words land across the field like a bell. Mercer, standing near the back beside his daughter, bowed his head. Elijah concluded simply. "Some men wear authority. Others earn trust. Only one of those lasts." The applause rose. Slowly, then all at once. Above them, sunlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the white uniform, the blue sky, and a city still learning that respect given early is wiser than regret given late.